What if I told you that one word, just 4 letters, could bring a millionaire to his knees and change 2 lives forever? Before you roll your eyes and think this is just another exaggerated story, let me ask you something. Have you ever been treated like you're invisible at work? Have you ever stood there while someone with money or power spoke to you like you were nothing more than furniture? If you're nodding your head right now, then you know exactly the fire that burns inside when dignity gets trampled. Here's what I want you to do. If stories like this matter to you, if you believe in standing up for what's right, hit that like button and subscribe, because we're about to dive into something that will shake you to your core. Tonight, we're walking into the upscale world of La Belle Vie, one of downtown Chicago's most exclusive restaurants. Crystal chandeliers, mahogany tables, the kind of place where deals worth millions get sealed over wine that costs more than most people's rent. It's a world where money talks and everyone else whispers. But on this particular autumn evening, something extraordinary happened. Something that would leave an entire restaurant speechless and prove that respect isn't something you can buy, it's something you earn. So here's the question that's going to haunt you for the next few minutes. What single word could possibly turn a powerful millionaire's world upside down? What word could silence a room full of Chicago's elite and force them to confront a truth they'd rather ignore? The answer lies in a collision between 2 people who couldn't be more different. A ruthless real estate tycoon who built his empire on intimidation, and a 24-year-old waitress fighting her way through college while supporting her family. When their worlds crashed together that night, what emerged wasn't just a moment of drama. It was a masterclass in human dignity that would echo through that restaurant long after the last customer left. Stay with me, because what you're about to witness will change how you think about power, respect, and the courage it takes to say exactly what needs to be said when it matters most. Meet Theo Blackwood, a man who commands respect through fear rather than admiration. At 57, Theo owns half of downtown Chicago's prime real estate, with a net worth that reaches into the hundreds of millions. His silver hair is always perfectly styled, his suits custom-tailored, and his reputation? Absolutely ruthless. But Theo wasn't born into this world of privilege. 30 years ago, he was Theodore Williams, a kid from the South Side whose father abandoned the family when Theo was 12. His mother worked 3 jobs just to keep food on the table, and young Theo learned early that life owed him nothing. He watched his mother collapse from exhaustion one too many times, watched their electricity get shut off, watched neighbors whisper about that poor Williams family. Those experiences forged something hard inside Theo's chest. He clawed his way through community college, worked construction during the day, and studied business at night. Every rejection, every condescending look from wealthy clients, every time someone treated him like he didn't belong, all of it became fuel for his relentless drive to prove them wrong. By 30, he'd flipped his first property. By 40, he owned a construction company. By 50, he was buying entire city blocks. Success should have healed those old wounds, but instead, it seemed to make them deeper. The boy who once felt powerless had become a man who demanded absolute control. Theo changed his last name to Blackwood, something that sounded more distinguished, more powerful. He bought the finest clothes, the most expensive cars, joined the most exclusive clubs. But success had cost him dearly. His marriage crumbled under the weight of his ambition. His 2 children barely spoke to him. The loneliness aided him daily, but he'd learned to mask it with anger and impatience. On this particular evening, Theo was dealing with more than just his usual demons. A major deal worth $40 million was falling apart. His ex-wife was threatening to take him back to court over alimony. His daughter had refused his latest attempt at reconciliation. The pressure was building, and Theo handled pressure the way he always did, by taking it out on whoever happened to be in his path. Now let me introduce you to Hazel Monroe, and trust me, she's nothing like what you might expect from a typical waitress story. At 24, Hazel was in her final year at Northwestern University, majoring in journalism with dreams of becoming an investigative reporter. She wasn't waiting tables because she lacked ambition. She was doing it because life had dealt her a hand that required everything she had just to stay afloat. Hazel's father had died in a car accident when she was 19, leaving behind medical bills that wiped out the family's savings and then some. Her mother, Maria, was battling diabetes and could only work part-time. Her younger brother, Miguel, was a sophomore in high school with dreams of becoming a doctor. Dreams that Hazel was determined to protect. Every dollar Hazel earned at La Belle Vie went toward tuition, rent for the small apartment she shared with her mother and brother, and Maria's medical expenses. She worked 6 nights a week, pulling 12-hour shifts, then spent her mornings in classes and afternoons studying in the university library. Sleep was a luxury she couldn't afford. But here's what made Hazel special. Despite everything life had thrown at her, she refused to let bitterness take root. She treated every customer with genuine warmth, even the difficult ones. Her coworkers admired her grace under pressure, her ability to defuse tense situations with a smile and quick thinking. Hazel had learned early that dignity wasn't something that could be taken from you. It was something you chose to keep, no matter what. Her father had taught her that before he died. Mija, he used to say, never let anyone make you feel small. You have worth that has nothing to do with money or status. Those words had carried her through the worst moments, when customers were rude, when professors questioned whether someone working full-time could handle a rigorous journalism program, when she was so tired she could barely stand but still had 4 more hours left in her shift. Tonight, however, Hazel was running on 3 hours of sleep. She'd stayed up until 4 a.m. working on a research paper about economic inequality in America, a topic that hit close to home. Her mother had been up coughing all night, worried about a new medication she couldn't afford. Miguel needed money for a school trip that Hazel knew they couldn't swing. The stress was showing in small ways, the slight tremor in her hands when she carried heavy trays, the way she had to take deep breaths between tables to maintain her composure. But Hazel had developed an almost supernatural ability to push through fatigue and personal problems to give her customers the service they deserved. What neither Theo nor Hazel knew was that their collision course had been set the moment they both walked into La Belle Vie that night. A bitter millionaire carrying decades of pain and an exhausted student carrying the weight of her family's future. 2 people who had never learned when it was safe to show weakness, about to discover what happens when a movable force meets a movable object. The stage was set for a confrontation that would strip away every pretense and reveal the raw human beings underneath. At exactly 8:47 p.m., Theodore Blackwood slammed his phone shut after another heated conversation with his lawyer. The $40 million deal was officially dead. 20 years of planning, 6 months of negotiations, all down the drain because his business partner had gotten cold feet at the last minute. Theo's jaw was clenched so tight his teeth hurt. He'd been sitting in his corner booth for nearly an hour, nursing a glass of scotch that had long since gone warm. The other diners gave him a wide berth. Even without knowing who he was, they could sense the storm clouds gathering around his table. His expensive suit couldn't hide the tension radiating from his shoulders, and his eyes held the kind of cold fury that made smart people walk the other way. When Theo finally raised his hand to signal for service, it wasn't a polite gesture. It was sharp, demanding, the kind of motion that said, "Get over here now," without needing words. Hazel noticed the signal from across the dining room. She'd been watching his table peripherally for the past hour, recognizing the signs of a customer on the edge. His body language screamed trouble, but she'd handled difficult clients before. She took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and walked over with the kind of professional smile she'd perfected through hundreds of challenging encounters. "Good evening, sir. I apologize for the wait. What can I get started for you tonight?" Her voice was warm, genuine, with just the right balance of friendliness and respect. It was the same tone that had earned her consistently high tips and praise from management. But tonight, it landed on Theo like gasoline on a fire. "About time," he snapped, not bothering to look up from his phone. "I don't have all night to waste sitting here. Bring me the filet mignon, medium rare, and make sure your kitchen actually knows what medium rare means. Last time I was here, they overcooked $100 steak." Hazel's smile never wavered, though something tightened slightly around her eyes. "Of course, sir. Would you like to start with an appetizer or—" "Did I ask for an appetizer?" Theo's voice cut through her words like a blade. "I told you what I want. And bring me another scotch, the 18-year Macallan, not whatever cheap stuff you served me earlier." The couple at the neighboring table glanced over, clearly uncomfortable with Theo's tone. Hazel felt her cheeks warm slightly, but her training kicked in. Kill them with kindness. Always stay professional. "Absolutely, sir. I'll get that order in right away and bring your scotch." As she turned to leave, Theo's voice followed her. "And make sure you actually write it down this time. I don't want any mistakes because you couldn't be bothered to remember a simple order." Hazel's steps faltered for just a fraction of a second. She had been writing everything down. She always did. But she didn't correct him. Instead, she nodded and continued toward the kitchen, feeling the eyes of other diners on her back. What Hazel didn't know was that Theo was watching her every move now, his frustration from the failed deal morphing into a need to control something, anything. In his world, power meant never having to ask twice, never having to wait, never having to accept anything less than perfection. And right now, this waitress, this young woman who probably made in a year what he spent on wine in a month, had become the target for all his pent-up rage. When Hazel returned with his scotch, Theo was ready for her. "This glass has water spots," he announced before she'd even finished setting it down. "Do you people not know how to properly clean glassware?" Hazel looked at the glass. It was spotless. She'd checked it herself under the light before bringing it over. "I'm sorry, sir. Let me get you a fresh glass right away." "You're sorry." Theo's voice was getting louder now, drawing more attention from the surrounding tables. "Sorry doesn't fix incompetence. How long have you been working here? Because clearly, no one's taught you basic standards." The question hit harder than Hazel expected. She'd been at La Bellevue for 8 months, longer than many servers lasted in such a high-pressure environment. She'd consistently received excellent reviews from management and customers alike. But standing there under Theo's withering glare, she felt every hour of lost sleep, every worry about her mother's medical bills, every moment of stress from her impossible schedule pressing down on her shoulders. "I've been here 8 months, sir," she replied quietly. "Let me get you that fresh glass." But as she reached for the allegedly spotted glass, Her exhaustion betrayed her. Her hand, trembling slightly from fatigue and stress, knocked against the cloth napkin beside Theo's plate. The napkin fluttered to the floor like a white flag of surrender. The restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Theo exploded. "Are you kidding me right now?" His voice boomed across the dining room, causing conversations to stop mid-sentence and heads to turn from every direction. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. Clumsy, careless, completely unprofessional." He stood up from his chair, his imposing frame towering over Hazel as she bent to retrieve the napkin. The power dynamic was stark, the wealthy man in his $1,000 suit berating the young woman in her server's uniform. "Look at this place." Theo gestured wildly with his arms. "People come here expecting excellence, expecting service that matches what they're paying for, and instead they get." He pointed directly at Hazel. "Whatever this is supposed to be." Other diners were openly staring now. Some looked embarrassed for Hazel. Others seemed fascinated by the spectacle. A few pulled out their phones, sensing that something significant was unfolding. Hazel straightened up, the napkin clutched in her hand. Her face was flushed, partly from embarrassment and partly from the exhaustion that was making everything feel more intense than usual. For a moment, she stood there absorbing his words, feeling the weight of every eye in the restaurant. Can you relate to being in Hazel's position? Have you ever felt the helpless frustration of being publicly humiliated by someone who thinks their money gives them the right to treat you however they want? Let us know in the comments, because what happens next will show you exactly how one person's courage can change everything. Theo wasn't finished. "This is exactly what's wrong with this generation," he continued, his voice carrying across the now silent restaurant. "No work ethic, no attention to detail, no respect for the people who actually matter. Do you have any idea who I am? Do you have any clue what I could do to your little career here with one phone call?" That's when something shifted in Hazel's expression. The professional mask she'd worn for 8 months, through hundreds of difficult customers and thousands of small humiliations, began to crack. Her father's words echoed in her mind. "Never let anyone make you feel small." She looked up at Theodore Blackwood, this powerful man who thought his money gave him the right to strip away her dignity in front of a room full of strangers, and for the first time in her life, Hazel Monroe decided she'd had enough. Enough. The word left Hazel's lips with a clarity that cut through the restaurant's tension like a sword through silk. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't whispered. It was delivered with the kind of quiet authority that commands attention from presidents and paupers alike. A single syllable carrying the weight of 24 years of dignity refusing to be crushed. The effect was instantaneous and electric. Every conversation in La Belle Vie died mid-sentence. Forks froze halfway to mouths. Wine glasses paused at lips. The soft jazz music playing in the background seemed to fade into nothing, as if even the speakers understood that something monumental was happening. Theodore Blackwood's mouth hung open, his latest insult dying on his tongue. For a man who had spent 30 years bulldozing through opposition, who had built an empire on the principle that money could silence any dissent, the word hit him like a physical blow. His brain struggled to process what had just happened. Had this waitress, this nobody, just told him to stop? Hazel stood perfectly still, her shoulders squared, the crumpled napkin still clutched in her left hand. But everything else about her had changed. The professional smile was gone. The apologetic posture had vanished. In its place stood a young woman who had found something she didn't even know she possessed, the courage to look power in the face and refuse to blink. "What did you just say to me?" Theo's voice came out as a hoarse whisper, disbelief dripping from every syllable. Hazel's eyes, brown like her father's, steady like her mother's, met his without wavering. "I said enough." The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. In that moment, the entire social order of the restaurant had been turned upside down. The man in the $5,000 suit, with his corner office and his millions in the bank, suddenly looked smaller. Meanwhile, the young woman in the basic black server's uniform seemed to grow taller with each passing second. Other diners found themselves leaning forward in their chairs, sensing they were witnessing something rare, a moment when the carefully constructed hierarchy of wealth and status cracked wide open, revealing the human beings underneath. Theo's face cycled through a spectrum of emotions. First came shock, his eyebrows raised, his mouth slightly agape. Then anger flashed across his features, his jaw tightening, his hands balling into fists. But as he stared into Hazel's unwavering gaze, something else crept in. Something he hadn't felt in decades. Uncertainty. For 30 years, Theo had operated under a simple rule. Speak loud enough, wave your money around long enough, and people will do whatever you want. It had worked in boardrooms, it had worked with contractors, it had worked with politicians. But standing there in the middle of La Bellevue, facing this young woman who refused to look away, he felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. "Do you know who you're talking to?" he demanded, but his voice lacked the commanding edge it had carried just moments before. Hazel tilted her head slightly, as if considering the question. "You're a customer in my section," she said simply. "A customer who seems to think that buying dinner gives him the right to treat me like garbage." A collective intake of breath swept through the nearby tables. Someone's phone camera was definitely recording now. This was the kind of moment that could go viral in hours. The Millionaire and the Waitress, facing off in Chicago's most exclusive restaurant. Theo's face flushed red. He opened his mouth to unleash what would surely be a devastating response, the kind of verbal destruction he'd perfected in boardrooms across the city. But as he looked at Hazel, really looked at her, something stopped him cold. He saw something in her eyes that he recognized but couldn't quite name. It was the same look he'd seen in his own mirror 30 years ago, when he was Theodore Williams, the kid from the South Side who refused to let poverty define him. It was the look of someone who had been pushed too far and decided to push back. But there was something else there too, something he'd lost somewhere along his climb to success. Dignity. Not the kind you buy with expensive clothes or exclusive memberships, but the kind that comes from knowing your own worth regardless of what anyone else thinks. The standoff continued, neither of them backing down. Theo's expensive watch ticked loudly in the silence. A server in the background accidentally dropped a spoon, the metallic clatter echoing through the restaurant like a gunshot. And in that suspended moment, something fundamental shifted. The man who had spent decades accumulating power found himself face to face with someone who possessed something he'd forgotten existed. The power that comes from refusing to be diminished. Hazel's voice broke the silence again, softer this time but no less firm. "I work hard, sir. Harder than you probably imagine. I treat every customer with respect because that's who I am, not because anyone forces me to. But respect goes both ways." The words hung in the air like a challenge, like a mirror held up to show everyone in the restaurant, especially Theodore Blackwood, exactly who they really were when the money and status were stripped away. For the first time in his adult life, Theo found himself at a complete loss for words. The silence that followed Hazel's words stretched for what felt like an eternity. Theo stood there, his mouth opening and closing like a man drowning in his own disbelief. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, he asked the question that would change everything. Why? Why did you say that? The vulnerability in his voice was jarring. Gone was the commanding boom that had filled the restaurant moments earlier. In its place was something raw, confused, almost childlike. It was as if Hazel's simple word had stripped away 30 years of carefully constructed armor, revealing the bewildered boy underneath. Hazel studied his face, seeing something there that surprised her. Behind the expensive haircut and the furious expression, she glimpsed a hurt that looked familiar. The same hurt she carried from watching her mother cry over medical bills, from feeling invisible to professors who assumed she couldn't handle her course load. Because, she said, her voice steady but not unkind, I'm tired of pretending that your pain gives you the right to inflict pain on others. Theo blinked, taken aback. My pain? What are you talking about? You think I don't see it? Hazel gestured toward his table, where his phone still lay face down, where the abandoned business documents told their own story. You came in here angry at the world, looking for someone smaller than you to take it out on. Well, here I am. But I'm not smaller than you, not where it matters. The restaurant had become a theater, with every patron and staff member an unwilling audience to this unprecedented exchange. The maitre d' stood frozen by the entrance, clearly torn between intervening and letting this remarkable scene play out. Servers clustered near the kitchen doors, whispering among themselves. At table 12, an elderly woman had tears in her eyes. You don't know anything about me, Theo said, but his voice had lost its bite. I know you're hurting, Hazel replied. I know you came in here looking for control because everything else in your life feels out of control. I know because I've been there. The difference is, when my world falls apart, I don't take it out on people who can't fight back. Theo's face crumpled slightly. I'm not. I don't usually. He stopped, looking around the restaurant as if suddenly aware of where he was, of the dozens of eyes watching him. This isn't who I am. Isn't it? Hazel's question hung in the air. Because from where I'm standing, this looks exactly like who you've chosen to be. A businessman at a nearby table shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He'd eaten at this restaurant dozens of times, had witnessed Theo's outbursts before, had even laughed about them with colleagues afterward. Now, seeing it through Hazel's eyes, he felt something uncomfortably close to shame. Look, Hazel continued, her voice softening slightly. I don't know what happened to you today. I don't know what deal fell through or what relationship broke down or what made you feel like you needed to prove your worth by diminishing mine. But here's what I do know. She paused, glancing around the restaurant, taking in the faces of everyone watching. When she spoke again, her voice carried to every corner of the room. I know that I'm 24 years old, and I work 16-hour days to pay for school and support my family. I know that I've been insulted, degraded, and treated like furniture by people who think money makes them better than me. And I know that I've reached my limit. A server near the kitchen, Marcus, who'd watched Hazel handle difficult customers with grace for 8 months, found himself nodding. He'd been in her position countless times, had felt that same helpless frustration. But here's the thing about limits, Hazel continued, her voice growing stronger. When you reach them, you get to choose what happens next. You can keep taking it, or you can decide that your dignity is worth more than your paycheck. Theo stood there absorbing her words. For the first time in decades, he was truly listening to someone rather than waiting for his turn to speak. And what he heard forced him to confront a truth he'd been avoiding for years. "I built my company from nothing," he said quietly, almost to himself. "I know what it's like to be treated like you don't matter." Then why do it to someone else? The question came from an unexpected source, the elderly woman at table 12, her voice shaky but clear. The entire restaurant turned to look at her. Why become the thing that hurt you? The question hit Theo like a physical blow. He staggered slightly, one hand reaching out to steady himself against his chair. Because that was exactly what he'd done, wasn't it? He'd become every condescending client who'd ever looked down on him, every wealthy investor who'd treated him like hired help. I don't know," he whispered. And that was the moment when the power dynamics in La Belle Vie completely flipped. The millionaire stood broken and confused, while the waitress stood tall with the kind of strength that can't be bought or sold. Around them, the restaurant's patrons found themselves reconsidering their own behavior, their own treatment of service workers, their own complicity in a system that measured worth in dollars. "The way you treat people when you think they can't hurt you, that's who you really are," Hazel said. "And right now, sir, who you really are isn't someone I'd want to know." The words landed with devastating accuracy. Theo looked around the restaurant, seeing clearly for the first time how his behavior appeared to others. The embarrassed faces, the uncomfortable shifting, the phones pointed in his direction. He saw himself as they saw him, not as a successful businessman, but as a bully who'd finally been called out. "I'm sorry," he said, and the words sounded foreign in his mouth. When was the last time Theodore Blackwood had apologized to anyone? I'm sorry." But Hazel wasn't done. "Don't apologize to me," she said. "Apologize to yourself. Apologize to the person you used to be before you decided that having money meant you could treat people however you wanted." The transformation was complete. The man who had entered La Belle Vie as a force of nature, demanding and imperious, stood humbled in the middle of Chicago's most exclusive restaurant, facing truths about himself that his wealth had allowed him to avoid for decades. In that moment, everyone in the restaurant, from the busboy refilling water glasses to the investment banker finishing his dessert, understood they had witnessed something extraordinary. Not just a confrontation, but a revelation about power, dignity, and what it truly means to be human. What happened at La Belle Vie that night wasn't just about one millionaire and one waitress. It was about something much bigger. A mirror held up to all of us, reflecting the choices we make every single day about how we treat the people around us. Think about it. How many times have you witnessed someone being cruel to a server, a cashier, a customer service representative? How many times have you looked away, uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene? How many times have you been the person with the power, and how did you choose to use it? Hazel's courage didn't come from some superhuman strength. It came from a simple decision that any of us can make. The decision to refuse to accept unacceptable behavior. She didn't have wealth, connections, or influence. What she had was something far more powerful. The recognition that her dignity was non-negotiable. This is the lesson that extends far beyond restaurant walls. In your office, when someone is being belittled in a meeting, you have a choice. In your community, when you see discrimination or bullying, you have a choice. In your family, when toxic behavior is being excused because that's just how they are, you have a choice. The beautiful thing about Hazel's enough is that it's available to all of us. You don't need money to say it. You don't need a college degree. You don't need permission from anyone. You just need the courage to recognize your own worth and refuse to let others diminish it. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Theodore's transformation shows us something equally important: that people can change when confronted with the truth about themselves. Most bullies aren't evil monsters. They're hurt people who've learned to hurt others as a way of feeling powerful. When that cycle gets broken, real change becomes possible. The broader context here is about power structures in our society. We live in a world where wealth, status, and position often seem to matter more than character. Where people think their job title, their bank account, or their social media following gives them the right to treat others as less than human. But what happened at La Belle Vie proves that true power doesn't come from what you own. It comes from who you are when nobody's watching. It comes from how you treat the person who can't do anything for you. It comes from the courage to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult. The ripple effects of moments like this extend far beyond the individuals involved. Every person in that restaurant went home with a story that would influence how they treated service workers for months, maybe years to come. The businessman who had laughed at similar scenes before suddenly found himself questioning his own behavior. The elderly woman who spoke up discovered her own voice in that moment. Marcus, the server who watched from the kitchen, later told his friends about what he witnessed. Some of those friends work in retail, others in call centers, others in various service industries. They all carry pieces of Hazel's courage with them now, knowing that someone stood up and refused to be diminished. This is how change happens, not through grand gestures or viral campaigns, but through individual moments of courage that inspire others to find their own strength. One person deciding they've had enough can give permission to dozens of others to do the same. But let's be clear about something. This isn't just about service workers standing up to difficult customers. This is about all of us recognizing that we have both the power to hurt and the power to heal. We all have moments when we're Theodore, frustrated, angry, looking for someone to take it out on. And we all have moments when we're Hazel, vulnerable, tired, being treated unfairly. The question is, what do we do in those moments? Do we perpetuate the cycle of hurt, or do we break it? Theodore's final words, "I'm sorry," weren't just an apology to Hazel. They were an acknowledgement that he had become something he never intended to be. That success had corrupted his values. That somewhere along the way, he had forgotten that his money was a tool, not a weapon. The most powerful part of this story isn't the confrontation. It's the possibility of redemption. It's the idea that no one is beyond change, that even the most hardened heart can be softened when faced with authentic courage and truth. So what does this mean for you, sitting there watching this story unfold? It means that every interaction you have is an opportunity to either lift someone up or tear them down. It means that your character is revealed not by how you treat your equals, but by how you treat those who are different from you, struggling more than you, or simply trying to do their job. It means that courage is contagious, and your willingness to stand up for what's right, even in small moments, can inspire others to do the same. It means that dignity isn't something that can be given or taken away by others. It's something you choose to maintain for yourself. And it means that change is possible, in individuals, in communities, in the whole world, one brave moment at a time. When Theodore Blackwood finally left La Belle Vie that night, he was a different man than the one who had walked in. The weight of what had happened, not just the confrontation, but the recognition of who he had become, sat heavy on his shoulders. His $40 million deal was still dead. His ex-wife was still threatening court action. His daughter was still refusing his calls. But for the first time in years, those weren't the thoughts consuming his mind. Instead, he kept hearing Hazel's words, "Apologize to the person you used to be." 3 weeks later, Theodore did something unprecedented. He walked into his company's headquarters and announced a new policy. Every employee, from janitor to vice president, would receive the same level of respect. Not because it was good for business, but because it was right. Some of his executives thought he'd lost his mind. His accountant worried about his mental health. But Theodore had found something worth more than money: his humanity. Hazel finished her shift that night and went home to her tiny apartment, where her mother was sleeping peacefully for the first time in weeks. The medication they couldn't afford had been mysteriously paid for by an anonymous donor. Miguel's school trip was covered too. Hazel never connected it to the broken man who had apologized in the middle of a restaurant, but she didn't need to. What mattered was that she had finally learned the most important lesson her father had tried to teach her. Dignity isn't something you ask for, it's something you demand. And once you demand it, really demand it, the world has no choice but to listen. But the transformation extended far beyond these two people. Marcus, the server who watched from the kitchen, started speaking up when customers were rude to his colleagues. The businessman at the nearby table began treating service workers with genuine respect instead of casual indifference. The elderly woman who found her voice that night started volunteering at a local organization that advocated for workers' rights. This is the transformative power of standing up for your dignity. It doesn't just change you, it changes everyone around you. It gives others permission to stand tall, to demand respect, to refuse to accept unacceptable behavior. If this story moved you, if you've ever been in Hazel's position or recognized yourself in Theodore's behavior, hit that like button right now. Because stories like this need to be shared, and your support helps us bring more of them to light. Share your own experiences in the comments below. Have you ever had a moment where you finally said, "Enough"? Have you witnessed someone else's courage change the entire dynamic of a situation? Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear to find their own strength. And if you want more stories that matter, stories that show the power of human dignity and courage, subscribe to Milton Stories. Because every week, we're going to show you real people making real choices that prove one fundamental truth. You don't need money, status, or power to change the world. You just need the courage to say one simple word when it matters most. Enough. 4 letters. 1 syllable. Infinite power. Thank you for watching until the very end. If you loved this story, there's a whole collection waiting for you. Just click the image on your screen to dive into the next video.